Welcome to the program. It's Linda Strassburg with interviews and interactions. This morning, I was out playing in my yard, and I was getting dirty and dirt in my fingernails, and I was having the best time of my life. And I think a lot of people today will say the same thing because gardening is skyrocketing. My guest today is going to talk to us about gardening. And this morning, I normally call most of my guests to remind them about the time and that they're on the program today, and just welcome them on to the program and ask if they have any last-minute questions. And when I called Celeste's house, her husband answered, and he said she's out in the garden. I thought, well, that's exactly where I expected her to be. And she came in, and she agreed to be on the program with us. She's written a fantastic book. And it not only tells you about gardening, but it tells you about what to do with what you find in the garden. She's been growing vegetables for 35 years, and then she knows how to preserve the vegetables, freezing, drying, fermenting. And now there's a new place in Salt Lake City that you can actually freeze dry your vegetables, and they last for 25 years, and they still have the nutrients. So there's so many people that are getting involved in this because they want to be healthy. So I can't wait to invite Celeste Longacre to the program. Celeste, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me.
I love your last name. It kind of goes with what you do.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, and that came with my husband, too.
Did I? Well, you do kickboxing, and that's a regular practice at kickboxing, so that's kind of, something really calm you do, and then something to get rid of all your energy, I suspect.
Yeah, well, I do use up a lot of energy in the garden because there's a lot of hauling and moving things, but you don't get the aerobic kind of energy that I get from kickboxing. It's nice to get things really moving, at least once in a while.
Well, you're a multifaceted person, and that's one of the reasons I wanted you on the program today, because so many people write books about gardening, but they don't write about what to do with it when you finally get the produce.
Right, yes, that's important, because especially, if you have a lot of stuff coming out of your garden, and people are like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with all this stuff?
Mm-hmm. I've never had that challenge. Mine just seemed like I just have enough. I don't know, maybe I need to get a little bit better practice, but I have a huge garden myself, and I've always had one every year. So everybody's getting excited about organic and growing their own vegetables, and so many people have limited space, but they can find a way to plant that, can't they?
Absolutely. Even if you have limited space, even if you live in an apartment, if you have a sunny balcony, you could grow some tomato plants or whatever else you really like in pots on your balcony. I think that most vegetables need 6 or 8 hours of sun, so that's really the thing you have to watch out for. And if you don't have a place that has sun, lots and lots of communities are now doing community gardens. So you could look into that and see if you could participate in a community garden.
You know what's really sad? I read an article where there's so many children, especially in New York and the big cities, they have never seen a garden. They don't have, in fact, they see cement all the time. And the 7-Eleven is their source of food if they want something. I think that's so sad. I hope this catches on even more than it has.
Yeah, I think that's really sad, too. But I do see a trend in people wanting to garden more. And, 15 or 20 years ago, people were just not interested. Not everybody, but most people were just really not interested in it, whereas over the past few years, people have just been asking me all kinds of questions, and how do I do this, and how do I do that? And that's the main reason that I wrote the book, is because so many people asked me to.
Mm-hmm. What's the first thing you would tell somebody to do that is considering planting a garden?
Well, I think the first thing that you need to do is figure out what you like the best, because that's what you want to grow. If lettuce is your absolute favorite thing, then that's what you'd want to grow. If tomatoes are your absolute favorite thing, that's what you'd want to grow. And then you'd want to look around for the spot, because, again, not only does it need 6 to 8 hours of good sunlight a day, but it needs to kind of be a place that drains well and a place that's away from other places that use a lot of chemicals, like sometimes golf courses use a lot of chemicals. You don't want to be downhill from that. You don't want to be too close to shrubs and trees that could pull the nutrients away from your vegetables out of the soil. You don't want to be a place where cars can drive by and splash up water on it. So picking the spot is pretty critical.
Mm-hmm. What about preparing the soil? I mean, you have to prepare the soil, don't you, forever? And raised gardens especially, you would have to.
Absolutely, because what you're doing when you're preparing the soil is you're giving the food to the plants. so that they can be healthy and thrive and grow, and they can give their food back to you. But we do need to feed the plants. We can't just go out and start digging in the dirt somewhere and think that everything is going to grow really well.
Mm-hmm. I like your statement. We definitely are what we eat. However, we are also made of what our food eats.
Absolutely.
I think I'm organic. I'm an organic gardener. And how do you describe an organic gardener?
Well, organic gardeners don't use pesticides and we don't use herbicides. We try to do everything sort of like our ancestors did, like our grandparents and our great-grandparents did. Because, before World War II, pretty much everybody was an organic gardener. They would use the manure from the chickens and the cows to put it to feed their plants, and they didn't have, all that many pesticides and herbicides, and they didn't use chemical fertilizers either. They would use more natural fertilizers. And I think there's an energy that comes with that doesn't come when you use the chemicals.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a compost pile?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so do I. I'm not very good at it. I'm learning how to do that, but I have one.
It's not that hard, really. You just throw stuff in. It doesn't have to be fancy. My compost is just in a big caged, open thing that I throw stuff in the top, and then it's kind of got a hook on it so I can open it up when it's time to take the stuff out.
Mm-hmm. We have a place here in Salt Lake where on May 15th they have this big extravaganza where they sell all these different kind of tomatoes and heirlooms, and I can't believe how many people show up. But it seems like people are so passionate about planting tomatoes, more so than anything else. Can you give us some pointers on tomatoes and then what you do with them after?
Yeah, tomatoes I think are one of the very, very favorite garden vegetables. And they're not hard to grow, but they're not really super easy to grow either. It depends on what kind you grow. I like the heirlooms, and they make these wonderful tasting tomatoes, and sometimes they're really nice and big and they're really juicy. But sometimes they don't produce as many tomatoes as some of the hybrids do.
Mm-hmm.
But I grow them up, and I keep the vines because it puts out lots of suckers. And if you had a couple of acres that you could dedicate to tomatoes, you would probably just want to put them in the ground and let them go. But most of us don't have 2 acres to dedicate to tomatoes. So I have supports that I grow them up, and I limit them to 2 or 3 vines. So I take out the rest of the suckers, which come right where the leaves sort of join the main stem. There'll be little suckers that will start. And then I tie them to the supports with strips of cloth that I've cut, and because string is too small, the plant can get heavy and fall over, and it can cut the plant if you just try to use string. But just keep going and keep tying the plant up and let it do its thing, and it will definitely reward you. Tomatoes do like a lot of potassium, so that's something you might want to be careful of. Make sure you have that in your soil. Some areas have too much potassium, so having your soil tested is really a good way to find out what exactly is in it.
That's neat. I didn't know this about cucumbers, that they'll stop producing if you don't pick the cukes,
Yeah.
So sometimes I go out there and one matures and, oh.
Yeah, well, that's true of most plants. The job of a plant is to reproduce itself. So once it actually has reproduced itself, it's done. It's going to say, okay, I'm done. I'm going to stop, producing the little babies now because I've already done my job.
Mm-hmm. What's a root cellar? I think so many people don't know what that is, but I remember it on the ranch I grew up in. I remember my grandpa would send me down to the root cellar to get potatoes and onions. But explain to the listeners, if they haven't ever heard of a root cellar, what that is.
Well, root cellars are I don't know how exactly. Do you have cold winters there?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what you'd want to do is root cellar is a place to store beets and carrots and turnips and potatoes all through the winter. And if you have a cold climate, you can if you have a basement that isn't heated and doesn't freeze, you can just take a corner of that basement and build a critter-proof kind of room with a door and shelves, and then that could be a root cellar. Or if you have a basement that's heated, you could take the farthest corner away from the heat and perhaps build a couple walls with insulation, and maybe then you would have a root cellar. Some people, we put a root cellar in before we put one of our additions on. So my husband dug down to the ledge, and he built up with cinder blocks, and then we just put a trap door in the floor. He kind of earth burned it. He put lots and lots of earth around it. So it doesn't freeze in the winter, but it does stay cold. And the beets and the carrots will stay, I've put them in the root cellar in September, and I put them in sand. I kind of pack them in very, very dry sand in 5-gallon buckets. And I've put beets and carrots in there in September, and I've still had some that were perfectly fine the following July.
Wow, that's neat.
Yeah.
People are really getting into fermentation because it's so healthy for you. Can you share with us a little bit about all these things I'm asking, Celeste? Is it Celeste? I'm sorry, Celeste. All these questions I'm asking Celeste to the listeners, these are all in her book. So you can find all these elements of gardening and producing and fixing the food in her book. It's called Celeste's Garden Delights. Discover the many ways a garden can nurture you. And Celeste, the fermentation, people are really getting into that, aren't they?
I think fermentation is really a missing piece in Americans' diet. Our ancestors, they didn't have freezing and canning, and so they fermented their foods to, as a way to preserve them. So they ate fermented foods every day, and they probably just left stuff out on the counter and it fermented itself, and then they ate it too. So, in my book I have how to make beet kvass and fruit kvass, as well as, of course, the kimchi and sauerkraut and things that people know. But the beet kvass and the fruit kvass are actually drinks, and I've been doing the beet kvass. What my husband and I do is we just take a shot glass with most of our meals, so we just have a little tiny bit. And the fruit kvass I've been doing for a couple of years, and you can make it with all different kinds of fruits and vegetables, and it's good to do it with different kinds of fruits and vegetables because they'll attract different kinds of bacteria. But I started doing this about 4 years ago, and I actually haven't been sick a single day since.
Mm-hmm. My daughter gets together with a bunch of other women, and they do this together. So I thought that was kind of neat that they were. Yeah,
that's really neat.
I heard that, and I've read a lot of articles that bees are because the insecticides and the GMOs and all those things. The bees are really having a hard time staying around. So can you share with us a little bit about the good and the bad insects, of which bees are good?
Well, most bees are actually good. They're the pollinators. But some there is an insect that I think people are not aware of its good qualities, and that's the paper wasps. And their favorite food is aphids, and aphids can be a real problem in a garden because not really that much does eat them. But the paper wasps love aphids. Sometimes if I take a plant home from a nursery, I can tell right away if it has aphids on it because I'll put it on the picnic table out front, and the wasps just are all over it instantly.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So they take care of that problem for me.
Wow, and they scare me though.
Yeah, there still really isn't that bad, and you can get rid of it pretty quickly with straight ammonia. And we don't really let them nest except in places that are kind of like out of the way, but we do let them nest in out of the way places. And they kind of mind their own business, and we kind of mind our own business, and we get along.
Mm-hmm. Do you have chickens in your yard? You have a section on chickens here.
I do, yes. We do have chickens.
And why do you have them? So many people are raising chickens now, too, by the way.
I think that's a really good sign. I think that's an excellent sign. And also it's a complete circle because I give all the weeds to the chickens, which they love, and then they give their chicken manure to the garden. So it's a very nice complete circle. It's one feeds the other, and then the other feeds it back.
Mm-hmm. And what part of the country do you live in?
I live in New Hampshire.
Oh, yeah, it gets cold there.
It gets really cold here. Last winter was really, really cold.
You said chickens don't like snow. What do you do with them?
Actually what I do is I shovel them a courtyard in the winter when it snows, and I put down hay so that they can get under the coop. The snow doesn't get under the coop. So they actually have a place to go all winter long. They can go out and get some sunshine and fresh air. Some people, if you don't shovel them a courtyard, they will stay in the coop all winter long, which I'm sure is where the term cooped up came from.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't like that.
No, I wouldn't like it either.
So you cover their little yard with straw and things like that.
Right. I shovel the hay away, and then, shovel the snow away, and then put down hay so that they do, when it is actually snowing, they don't go outside. But what I try to do is have some pumpkins or squashes or some sunflower seeds, give them something to do in the coop so they don't peck each other. And then as soon as the snow stops, I go and shovel their courtyard and get the snow off their little ramp and as soon as I'm done, they come running out.
Mm-hmm. How has the heavy winter affected you this year? Have something suffered, or have you survived through that?
We survived pretty well. We had both a cold and a snowy winter, and it was a little bit, late because there was so much snow. It was a little bit late getting the garden started, but we just found out today that we've had the warmest May in history. So it's kind of coming back a little bit. It's making up for it a little bit, I think.
Yeah, see, we've been just the opposite. It's been really dry during the winter. We had one snowstorm, and then May was just total wet.
Oh, really?
So we're living opposite of you, so it's really interesting.
I think that happens a lot. I think when you get the snow, we don't, and when we get the snow, you don't. I think that's pretty typical.
Mm-hmm. This book is beautiful. It has a lot of pictures in it for the listeners. It shows you how to do things and how to take care of stuff and how to plant different types of plant. And then do you do herbs? And I noticed there's a section in here on herbs.
Yes, I do. I grow a lot of thyme and basil and oregano and mint and tarragon, French tarragon, and chives.
One of the highs I have is I come from an Italian family. I make a lot of Italian food, and I just love going out and getting fresh basil and the fresh herbs and put them in the soups or the stews or the lasagna. There's just a high that you get from going out and picking your own produce. And I would encourage everybody to do this. And it says about nurturing you. Can you touch a bit on that, about how that garden nurtures you? Because I find that I have a sense of peace when I go out in the garden, and there's so many metaphors in the garden that I think of because I write different things each week. And there's a lot of metaphors in the garden as well that you can learn from.
Oh, absolutely. I think, being outside, being in the fresh air, listening to the birds and the bees, digging in the dirt. There's a whole thing now about earthing yourself, connecting with the earth, so you're connecting with the earth. And also you're growing your own food, and so how can that hurt you? It's your own energy going into the food, and especially if you enjoy it, which I do. I enjoy weeding and being out there with the garden. So I'm putting good energy into that food. Personally, I think that everything carries the vibration of everything that's happened to it. So, if you think about where a lot of the food has been, maybe it hasn't been in such a happy place. But if you grow it yourself and you love your garden, it's going to be happy food. Mm-hmm.
And they're doing a lot of studies on how plants interact with us, that they can even tell when you're going to come and, kill them, cut the leaves off or something. They've done some studies, and they actually shudder. A bunch of scientists were doing this, and I know it sounds kind of woo-woo, but they're finding out that the plants do have sort of an energy that they're related to humans, so it's really, that they can relate to humans, I should say. It's interesting. I find that so fascinating because I thought that all along.
Right, I agree. I think that's very, very true. And sometimes I will warn weeds that they're going to be gone pretty soon, and they can maybe withdraw their energy a little bit.
So what kind of feedback are you getting on your book?
Actually, I'm getting pretty good feedback on the book. People tell me they really like the way it looks, and they like the information that's in there, and they find that there's a ton of information in there. There's, a lot of different things that I covered. So I'm getting really good reviews, and people have said that it's just such a beautiful book, and it's so practical, and I'm getting good feedback.
And I love the canned tomatoes on the cover, because I remember I used to can tomatoes all the time, and they always look so pretty. There's something that you get from looking at all the produce that you grew, and then you put it in the jars, and then you process it, and you have them on your shelf, and then when winter rolls around, there's just I can't explain the pleasure from that, but there's a pleasure there that you see that you have something that you produce that in unison with, your house and your yard and, the garden that you live in, the plants that you planted.
Yeah, I call it summer in a jar. Because it is. It's summer in a jar, and I make all our spaghetti sauce and can it, and when you open that jar up, it's wonderful. And people will say, oh, well, canning is so much work, and yeah, we'll spend a couple of days in the summertime, and they're pretty good full days canning, but I often, if I make spaghetti sauce, I'll start in the morning, and by the time, 5 o'clock comes around, I have usually got about 18 pints of spaghetti sauce sitting on the table, And that's 18 times that I won't have to think about what I'm going to fix for lunch or dinner, because I can just open the jar and pour it into a pan and heat it up.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the best things I learned how to make was zucchini pickles. I never thought zucchinis would make pickles, but you know how you get so many zucchinis when you plant one? It's a good place to put them because then you can preserve them.
Oh, zucchini pickles are very good.
Yeah, they are. So how can people find out more about you, Celeste?
Well, they can go to my website, which is CelesteLongacre.com, and they can find me there. I also do a blog for the Old Farmer's Almanac, and they can find me there. So, you know, there's a lot of information. I do a blog on my website as well, and I also, right now I'm offering a free gift. People can download a list of what they can and what plants can be put in before the frost is done and which ones you need to wait until the frost is completely done to put in. Because I think there's maybe even a few more plants that don't mind the frost than the ones that do.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe in planting by the moon?
I do. I do believe in that, but I can't always do that because I spend, for me, it takes all of April and May for me to just get the garden planted. And so I probably need to plant 18 or 20 or even 22 days out of each month. And so they're not all going to be the greatest days to plant by the moon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I can look at it, I do, but if I can't look at it, I just plant when I'm home and it's not raining.
Mm-hmm. And why is that? What's the thought process behind that, or the science behind it?
You know, it's just the ancient art of astrology that a lot of people believe in and some people don't.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Do you think that it's better to use like water that's not, you know, culinary water, or is it better to irrigate, or?
Well, I think you have to irrigate. And we have a rain barrel,
mm-hmm.
and that actually is really good water to use because it is the rain. You know, it's not water that's coming up from a deep well. But I don't think that it's very easy to have a garden and think that you're not going to have to irrigate it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's
there's so many people in the city that they're kind of trapped into using culinary water when they can't. But that's really good. They're really promoting rain barrel collection here in Salt Lake City just because of the drought that they think that we're going to have, and they are suggesting that, which I think is wonderful advice.
That is wonderful. That's really wonderful.
We've been talking this last half hour to Celeste Longacre. She's written a book called Celeste's Garden Delights. Discover the many ways a garden can nurture you, and I second the motion that gardens nurture you. And it's a beautiful book. It has wonderful pictures in it and shows you how to do it, and then it shows you what to do when you're done. When you harvest it, what you can do with all the harvest. And she has a special section in here on fermenting, which I think is a really important section of the book because so many people are getting into that to be healthy. And they're finding out a lot of new things about the health of that. Celeste, thank you so much for being with us, and thanks for writing this beautiful book. Good luck in your garden.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Celeste, it's a really good book if you want a gardening book that's a little bit different than, other gardening books. You'll want to get a hold of hers. It's Celeste Longacre. I thought that was so cute that her name was Longacre. She must have married her husband just for that very reason.